Even if you don't grow Bulbophyllum orchids, you may find something interesting and creative in this upcoming video. Stay tuned at The Orchid Hut. Welcome back to The Orchid Hut. My name is Dana, and today we are going to be doing something very different with this Bulbophyllum orchid that you see planted in this wooden slat basket. Now, there's a couple of parts to this video. The first is just going to be a bit of an update with what is going on at the Orchid Hut. I'll introduce this video and then we will get to the actual repotting project. So if you would like to jump straight to that, I will leave a timestamp in the description below. So first we're going to cover what's going on at the Orchid Hut. My last video was oh so jumbled because it is that time of year when orchids are being shifted around here and there, outside, inside, behind shade cloth, you know, under grow lights, in the bay window. They're pretty much all over the place. Well, the progress that I have made since that video is that I have my secondary grow space with the grow lights all adjusted. I took all of the lights down. I made sure that all of the shelving and all of the hanging racks were in place with the lights connected and working like I want them to be. I will share that with you at some point when I get the plants a little bit better arranged there. The training for the spiking Phalaenopsis orchids is going well, and some of those will be coming back into the bay window shortly because it will be quite all right for them to arch their blooms over towards the bay area window sunlight. And I will put a little clip here of the bay area window just so that you can see the morning sun. It's bright like this from about 8 a.m. until about 10:15, 10:30. It looks like a lot of sun, but because these orchids are far enough away from the glass, it really is not nearly as intense as it looks, and they are loving it. So, you know, just touch the leaves from time to time if you have a similar situation, and just make sure that the leaves are not heating up, because that would be an indication that you may be on your way to sunburn. Okay, so that's kind of an update at the Orchid Hut. Now, about this particular orchid, it is Bulbophyllum, and I'm going to show you the tag. The tag says fascinator, but that is incorrect according to a very reliable source. It's actually the species Bulbophyllum romyi. Now, you know, it was about to bloom when I purchased it 2 years ago, and then it bloomed another time that same year. And I did a video on it as a featured orchid when it was blooming, and I'll put a link in the upper right hand corner of the screen if you would like to go back and watch that. The plant looked much healthier then. If you go back and watch that video, you will see that the plant looked to be healthier than it appears now. And last year it did not bloom for me at all. So this year I tried moving it to a bit higher light, and you can see that some of the leaves got a bit sunburned from that. So I don't think that that's really what the issue was. I think the issue is that it is in this very large wood slat basket in kind of a medium bark chip, you know, orchid mix. And this is a very shallow rooted orchid, and I think the basket is too large. There's far too much media in here, and the fine little tiny roots on this orchid just don't match up with how this is potted in this wood slat basket. And so I think I made a mistake when I put it in here. So we're going to try to correct that and try to sort of rejuvenate this plant and see if we can't get it back on track for next year's growing season. Let me kind of show you just another little insert here, and I'll give the website credit, but it shows the difference between the species Fascinator and the species romyi. It shows the difference in the blooms, and that's really the only way that you can tell. So in this little insert picture, I believe you will see Fascinator on the left and you will see romyi on the right, and you can tell that the petals and sepals are different. And then on the romyi species, the little fringe on the petals is a purple color, and they say that they look like squashed raspberries. Well, you can definitely see the difference in the blooms, but it would take a trained eye to really know that there was a difference. And so now what I'll do is I'll insert a picture of this plant when it was in bloom, and you actually can tell that the bloom better matches the romyi Bulbophyllum. So I do think the tag is incorrect, and I have a romyi, not a Fascinator, even though that's what I bought it as. Let's talk about what this project is going to look like, and I want to kind of go over the supplies that I have in front of me and the decision that I have made for how to try to get this orchid a bit back on its feet so that it can grow a bit better next year and hopefully bloom again someday. So if I backtrack just a little with my own thought process here, I first thought, okay, well, I'm just going to use a self-watering pot, and I'll put it in some leca, and maybe that will keep those little fine roots nice and moist over the winter. And then I decided, again, pot far too large for this fine-rooted orchid. Maybe going from this to the leca is not maybe the best idea over the winter because of the evaporative cooling. Okay, so then I decided, I'm not going to even try to use this self-watering pot. It's really not even an improvement over how it's potted right now in this wood slat basket. So I invented kind of my own little creative idea here, and let me kind of share that with you. So I have 3 drip trays, and one of them was already cracked, so I could sacrifice this one. And you don't want to use 2 that are the same if you choose to try to do this with one of your orchids, because when they stack together there's no space in between, and I'm going to be making my own little self-watering system here to try to revive this orchid. So what you need instead of 2 drip trays that are identical is you need one that's a little bit different, so that when one sets inside the other, there's a gap here as a water reservoir. Now, of course, you have to make sure that the bottom one doesn't have any cracks or holes, because this one will be holding the water. And this is the one where I'm going to put the Bulbophyllum pieces that I take out of here in order to see if I can get some roots to develop over the winter under the grow lights. Okay, now the other thing that I did is, and hopefully the camera can pick up on this, I cut 2 slits in this cracked drip tray, and I have a piece of microfiber cloth from an old mop. So, don't throw your old mops away if they have these microfiber pieces on them, because you can cut these off and reuse them as a wick. And I have already pre-checked this. It will wick up the water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread this through one of the slits, and you want to make sure the slit is large enough so as not to constrict the wick's ability to work. And I'm going to pull it through, leaving a good portion of it in the bottom of the saucer here. And then the tails will fit down inside this other little saucer where the moisture will be. All right, so let's first of all test that this is actually going to be wicking up water. So We're going to pour water in here. We will set the wick down inside. And we're just going to kind of keep an eye on this and make sure that this is beginning to soak up the water. You can see the color that it is now, and we'll check it again in just a little bit. All right, now the rest of my supplies are some dampened sphagnum moss, and that will be going in the bottom so as to get the moisture from the wick. And then in order to hold the little pieces of the plant down, it's going to need something a little bit more weighted. So on the top I'm going to put some leca, which should also hold some of the moisture as it wicks up through the bottom. And we can already tell this is working because the wick is turning dark as the water is absorbed. Okay, so I'm going to get a few more supplies, and after I take a little break here, we will be back and we will start picking out the pieces of this Bulbophyllum that will be repotted in this little sanctuary to hopefully develop a few more roots for next year's growing season. Okay, be right back. Okay, so let's get started. Let me show you the top of this basket before I start pulling it apart, because once I start pulling the pieces out, you may not be able to exactly see what it is that I'm working with, but you can see the little roots actually above the media. And when I pull on these pieces, it's not going to take very much at all for it to separate from the top of the media. Okay, and also, before I continue, I have to give credit where credit is due. This idea was actually developed as a spin-off from one of Roger's videos from Roger's Orchids. He was attempting to save, I believe, a dendrobium, a shallow-rooted dendrobium, Jenkinsii, I believe, and taking it off of a mount and putting it in some sphagnum so that it could kind of rejuvenate itself over the winter and develop a root system so that the orchid could survive. And I thought, I can do the same thing with this Bulbophyllum. The only thing I'm really changing here is my wicking method. I'm adding that, and then I'm adding the leca on top to kind of weight down the pieces of the orchid. Okay, so let's go ahead and start pulling this up, and as usual, the pieces of media begin to fall on the floor. And I cannot remember whether this was one plant, two plants, or just a whole bunch of pieces. I can't really remember. But we're gonna get it out of the basket. Okay. And let me set the basket aside. And what I can tell is that the root system attached to pieces of cork that probably held on to the moisture content a bit better, but the bark, probably was not a friend to this root system. The bark is rather large and probably did not hold on to the moisture enough. This is a lesson in matching the type of root system with the orchid media that you choose sometimes, because different types of root systems will prefer different growing environments, especially depending on how much moisture they want. This one, when I was taking care of it in the basket, was getting misted at least every day, and you can tell that some of the pseudobulbs are a bit wrinkled, but others look completely fine. It's very much a sort of a branching plant. It is kind of low and sprawling. it would probably do well on a mount, but I think because it kind of struggled this year, I don't necessarily want to attempt to have it recover on a mount. I need to see, I think, a more robust root system. And then maybe for the next growing season, it can go in a more shallow pot or maybe on a mount. I really am just going to have to see how the root system does before I make that next step decision. So most of this is coming away rather easily. I did attempt to mist the roots a couple of times this morning to see if it would help me identify which of the roots were still alive and functioning, because I was hoping that they would maybe turn green. And I couldn't really see that from the top of the media all that well. So when I take this over to the sink and rinse it, I will be hoping for the same thing, that the root system that is still functioning will turn green, and it will help me decide what old roots can be cut away. I don't want to remove any roots that are still living, because this is already in a bit of a struggle situation. Okay, so this is going to need a bit of a cleanup once I take it to the sink. And so let me do that, and I'll be right back after I clean up some of the mess on the counter. Okay, back from the sink. I can already tell two things. One is that the cleanup here is going to be a little bit challenging because it's difficult to tell the dead roots from the live roots. And as I was at the sink, I did end up with two plants that separated from each other, which kind of explains the reason why I had two tags. And now I'm kind of remembering when this one was shipped to me, it was kind of like an extra plant that they just threw in, and I had two instead of one, and they both went into the basket. So that memory is kind of coming back to me now. But so what we're going to do is we're going to take this just a step at a time. I've never done this before. You will see all of the errors and problems that I'm faced with as I'm doing this. So if you have a fine rooted orchid you want to try this with, you can certainly learn from my successes as well as my mistakes. And it may turn out that I actually need more than one of these little drip tray saucer setups, because all of this may not fit in one. Okay, so let's start with the larger one first. But before I do that, let me just show you something here about the growth pattern on this orchid. So, oh, and I saw this when I was at the sink, and of course now finding it again is a real challenge. Okay, here we go. All right, so you can see what this orchid does is, as it extends the rhizome and is going to be growing a new bulb, it will send out new little roots from the base of that bulb on the end of that rhizome there. So that's the place where I want to make sure it's in contact with the moss, because it will encourage that root growth. Hopefully the camera was able to focus on that. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what we have here. We're going to just start piece by piece. This is, you know, an older bulb, but it has new little bulb growths from it. So, you know, we don't want to separate that. The old bulb still does provide energy and nutrients to the newer growth. And the challenge is just figuring out where the old roots are so that that can be cut away. And I may not get all of the older roots because it would require sort of like picking through a lot. So I am, in general, cutting away larger areas where I can tell the root system is dead. I'm not going to be able to get all of the old roots, and some of the newer roots may get sacrificed, but in a case like this, it's just extremely difficult to go a single root at a time. Now this is an old piece of the rhizome that's no longer living, so that can go. And this root system is truly a bit of a tangled mess. It is a branching root system, I can tell, because one longer root sends out new growth. And I think this may be partially alive right here. It's also very difficult on these fine roots to, even be able to feel for the substance. And look, now I have 3 pieces. When I cut this old piece of rhizome out, it separated the plant. Okay, so this looks like a good first piece to work with. We'll see if we can get it over to one side so that we can work in the other pieces. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is take some of the dampened sphagnum moss and place it in the bottom of the tray. That wick should help keep it evenly moist. I will have to check the reservoir to see how quickly it, gets used up. And I will have to check and make sure that the wick is doing its job to keep things evenly moist. I don't really want it to stay quite as soggy as it is right now, but I also don't want it to get completely dry. So I'm just making sure the bottom here has an even layer. And then this is really easy to pick up, as one unit. You probably could even put like binder clips or maybe like clothespins to hold it together, depending on, the saucers that you use. Okay. So let's just get that piece positioned. It's a rambling crawler, that's for sure. Okay, that looks pretty good like that, especially after the leca is there to kind of weight it down. All right, now let's have a look at this piece. This is actually an old bloom spike right here. All right, let's see if we can get this one positioned. Okay, so far so good. And then the final piece, there may or may not be room. Let's see how much is left once it's trimmed. Okay, now this is an interesting situation here. This is the first pseudobulb I've found that is soft, which is not good. There is a continuation of the plant here with a new little leaf, and a piece here that also has a soft bulb at the top. So I'm going to be removing all of that because I don't like that it's soft. This is also another old bloom spike right here. We can get rid of that. And these are the leaves that were sunburned, which may be related to those bulbs turning a bit soft. Let's see. This is old down here, so we can cut this away. all of a sudden the pieces that I have to work with are getting smaller and smaller as I cut away the dead portions, which is good because if I had my preference, I really only want to have to take care of one of these little saucers with the water in it. Because this will, require a bit of different care, check-in, maintenance, etc. Now this doesn't have the greatest here. This is the weakest, I think, of the three pieces. Two of the leaves are yellowing. And this one may want to put out some new roots right here. This may be the piece that doesn't make it, but we'll go ahead and we'll work it in right here. And it will be easy to pull out if I tell that it's kind of dragging the rest of this down. Okay, so next up is the leca. So I'm going to hold this down. And the idea here is that these roots may even like the leca, attach onto it. But yet there is airspace in between the pieces, so you don't have to worry about it staying too wet. Alright, so this is our completed project here to see if we can get some new life, fresh start for this Bulbophyllum romyi species orchid. And I will definitely be sure to bring this one back on a video from time to time so that we can see if those roots are enjoying this particular setup or not. We should begin to see new root tips forming, maybe attaching to some of the leca pieces, and then, depending on the success of that, I'll make a decision about what to do with this next growing season. Alright, if you enjoyed this video or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up. The subscribe button will be coming up in the bottom right hand corner of the screen, and don't forget the notifications bell to let you know when I've posted something new. Thank you all so much for watching. Wish me luck on this one, and I'm going to put the tags back in even though they are incorrect until I have a chance to make a new tag. Talk to you next time.